The screams started days later. They tore through the quiet office halls like alarms cutting through glass and polished floors. By the time people ran toward the noise, I was already outside, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold through the windows above. No one knew that the woman standing there, calm, invisible, almost peaceful, had scripted that moment not long before, while wiping dust from her husband's desk and finding the secret that would burn down everything we built together. My name is Margaret Hill, and this isn't only a story about revenge. It's about the moment a woman finally stops apologizing for her own anger and learns that sometimes justice wears the face of payback. I didn't plan it, not at first. I just wanted the truth to sting the way his lies had burned through me for years. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please take a second to like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach more people. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing how far these voices travel. The night I found that secret, something inside me went quiet. Not the kind of silence that means peace, but the kind that hums beneath the skin. A silence that promises movement, a storm gathering its strength. Richard's office always smelled like lemon cleaner and ambition. Every Friday, after closing my cafe, I went there to tidy up. I told myself it was love, but really it was habit. The kind of devotion that forgets where love ends and obligation begins. His desk was spotless, a shrine to control. At the center, our wedding picture smiled from a silver frame. I reached to wipe it clean, and that's when the papers shifted. A small tube rolled out, tapping against the frame before resting by my hand. For a moment, I just stared. My heart didn't race, my breath didn't catch. The stillness felt ancient, like something I had carried for years finally stepping into the light. I picked it up, read the label, and felt my chest tighten, not from shock, but recognition. It wasn't proof of betrayal I saw in that moment. It was proof that I had stopped existing in his world long before he left mine. That evening, I walked into my kitchen and saw the bottle of chili oil glowing under the light. Its deep red shimmered like anger pretending to be beauty. I didn't hesitate. I poured carefully, wiped the edges clean, and returned the tube to its hiding place the next morning, as if nothing had changed. But something had. The air felt sharper. Every word between us turned into an echo. I moved through the house with the quiet certainty of someone who already knows the ending. She's just waiting for the scene to catch up. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. Richard's office was always too clean. Not the kind of clean that feels fresh, but the kind that hides things. Every surface smelled of polish and disinfectant. Every book spine stood perfectly aligned, as if any sign of life would ruin the illusion of control he built around himself. I used to take pride in that space. I believed that keeping it tidy was a way of loving him, a way of proving that even if he stopped seeing me, I was still there, invisible, but loyal. That Friday afternoon, sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin, sharp lines that cut across the carpet. I could see the dust floating in those beams, swirling gently, alive in the air even when everything else stood still. I remember thinking that dust has more freedom than most people. It drifts, it lands, it leaves when it wants. I didn't realize then how much that tiny thought would stay with me. The sound of the city below hummed faintly through the windows. Phones rang from offices down the hall, muted by glass. Somewhere, a woman laughed. Bright, easy, young. I froze. It was the kind of laugh that belongs to someone who doesn't yet understand the price of loving the wrong man. I wondered if it was her. Clara, my daughter-in-law. The name itself burned like salt. I pushed the thought away. I wasn't ready to name the betrayal, not yet. On the bookshelf, Richard's achievements sat like trophies, plaques, certificates, photographs of charity dinners. He always made sure the world saw him as the devoted husband, the generous businessman, the man who gave back. But those who give too much in public often take too much in private. I dusted the frames slowly, letting each wipe of the cloth feel like a quiet erasure of a lie. When I finished, I sat in his chair and looked out over the city. I imagined how many stories were happening behind each window, how many women were pretending everything was fine while their lives quietly dissolved under fluorescent light. The office was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft tick of the clock. That clock mocked me. It ticked as if counting the seconds until the truth would explode. I leaned back, my fingers tracing the smooth edge of the desk, the very place where I had found that small, damning secret days before. I thought about how ordinary the moment had been. No thunder, no lightning, no grand discovery, just a wife, cleaning as she always had, uncovering proof that love had quietly died and been replaced by something hollow. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always break you right away. Sometimes it just opens a door inside you, a door that had been locked for years. Behind mine, I found a woman I barely recognized, one who had learned to make coffee for everyone else but forgotten what it tasted like when it was still warm. That night, as I closed the office door, I realized how heavy silence can be when it's no longer peaceful. The kind of silence that follows you down the hallway, all the way to the elevator, all the way home. I carried it like a fragile secret pressed against my chest. When I reached the parking lot, the sun was setting, painting the windows above in gold and red. From below, the building looked beautiful, almost holy. It was easy to mistake what shines for what's sacred. But I had touched the truth, and it burned. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind erase the smell of his office from my hands. I told myself I'd confront him soon, that I'd wait for the right moment. But some truths don't need words. They just need time to turn into fire. The next morning began like every other, coffee brewing, sunlight spilling across the kitchen tiles, and Richard sitting at the table pretending to read the paper. For years we had mastered the art of routine, the quiet choreography of people who knew their lines too well. I poured his coffee without asking if he wanted it, and he thanked me without looking up. That was our language now. Gestures instead of connection, silence instead of truth. I watched him for a long time, the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose, the slow way he folded the newspaper as if arranging excuses in neat lines. He told me he had a full day ahead, meetings back to back, the same story I'd heard 1,000 times. I nodded, smiled faintly, and wondered if he had any idea that I already knew. He still saw me as predictable, gentle, incapable of disruption. That belief was his first mistake. After he left, the house felt larger than usual. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of the wind outside, everything seemed to echo. I walked down the hallway and stopped at the door to his study. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly in the air, sweet and nauseating. I leaned against the doorway and realized that love had turned into maintenance, something I kept running, not because it mattered, but because I didn't know how to stop. That was when I noticed the first crack in the glass. Not literal, but emotional. The illusion of our marriage began to fracture in small, quiet ways. I remembered every time I had defended him, every time I told our son Ethan that his father was just tired, every time I lied to myself because it was easier than facing the truth. The anger came softly, almost tenderly, like a hand resting on my shoulder saying, "You've waited long enough." Later that afternoon, I went to the cafe. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, rich and grounding. My employees greeted me with warm smiles, unaware that their boss's world was collapsing in slow motion. I smiled back, pretending everything was fine. Pretending was something I'd perfected. When a customer complimented our pastries, I thanked her, thinking of the nights I had baked through tears, keeping the business alive while Richard entertained his clients. In the office upstairs, I sat at my small desk and opened the ledger. Numbers lined up perfectly, just like the years I had spent balancing everyone else's needs. The page blurred. I closed the book and pressed my hands against my face. For the first time in a long while, I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing through the weight of everything I couldn't say. That evening, when Richard came home, I noticed something small but unmistakable. He smelled faintly of perfume, something floral and light, not mine. The scent clung to his shirt collar like a whisper. He set his briefcase down, smiled absently, and said he'd had dinner at the office. Late meeting, he explained. The lie slid from his tongue so easily it almost sounded true. I stepped closer, pretending to straighten his tie, and caught another trace of that perfume. I didn't flinch, didn't confront him. Instead, I smiled. "You should get some rest," I said softly. He nodded, grateful for my gentleness, and went upstairs. I watched him disappear around the corner, feeling the first stirrings of something sharp and certain rising inside me. When the door to our bedroom closed, I stood there in the hallway, the smell of that perfume still hanging in the air. It was delicate, almost pleasant. How strange that something beautiful could carry such poison. The first crack in the glass had appeared, and I knew the rest would follow. The next few days unfolded with a strange stillness, like the air before a storm. Richard left early for work, kissed my cheek out of habit, and disappeared into a life I was no longer part of. I moved through the hours as if underwater, my mind turning over every sign I had ignored. The late-night phone calls, the sudden trips, the way he smiled at his phone and hid the screen when I walked into the room. One afternoon, I decided to bring him lunch at the office, something I hadn't done in years. It was a small test, though I told myself it was kindness. When I reached his car, parked behind the cafe, I opened the passenger door to leave the bag on the seat. That was when I noticed the small compartment on the dashboard slightly ajar. I pulled it open and froze. Inside, nestled among scattered receipts and pens, was another tube. Not chili oil this time, not even the same brand. But the meaning was identical and the ache it caused was worse. I stared at it for a long time, the lunch bag still in my hand. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the car, warm, comforting, utterly at odds with the cold truth staring back at me. I set the food down and felt my pulse steady rather than race. Anger didn't rush in. It settled, deliberate and calm. I closed the compartment, careful to leave everything as it was, and sat in the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt slick beneath my palms. Through the windshield, I could see the reflection of my face, composed, expressionless. That was when I realized the calmness wasn't peace. It was readiness. When Richard came home that night, he was talkative, almost cheerful. He told me a story about a supplier in San Antonio and how exhausting the trip had been. He said the hotel had bad coffee, that he missed my cooking. I nodded, smiling faintly, thinking about how easily he could lie with a straight face. I poured him wine, the same red we used to drink on our anniversaries, and watched him swirl it absent-mindedly. As he talked, my eyes drifted to the photo above the mantel, our wedding picture. The two of us young and foolish, believing in promises neither of us could keep forever. I remembered my mother's words on our wedding day. Love him, but never forget yourself. Somewhere along the line, I had forgotten both. Later, after he went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a notepad. I wrote down everything. The tube, the perfume, the hotel receipts I'd seen crumpled in his briefcase. I didn't plan a confrontation. I was collecting evidence, not for him, but for me. Proof that I wasn't imagining things, that the unease in my bones had a name. The refrigerator hummed softly, a low mechanical heartbeat in the stillness of the room. I stared at the list until the words blurred. Then, slowly, I folded the page and slipped it into my apron pocket. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I was done pretending. The next morning, when Richard kissed my cheek goodbye, I didn't flinch or pull away. I smiled and wished him a productive day. My tone was soft, even kind, but inside I felt a strange thrill, a pulse of quiet power I hadn't known in years. As I watched his car pull out of the driveway, sunlight flared on the windshield, momentarily blinding me. It felt symbolic somehow, the brightness before collapse, the glare that hides what's really there. I whispered to the empty house, "I see you now." And in that whisper, something irreversible began. When you live with someone for more than 40 years, you start to recognize the smallest tremors in their behavior. The way a lie shifts their breathing, the way guilt makes them choose silence over eye contact. Richard had mastered the art of pretending, but so had I. The difference was that I finally knew what I was pretending for. That Monday, I decided to stop waiting for the truth to stumble into my hands. I wanted to see it. I wanted to strip the secrecy from his life, like peeling wallpaper. I started small. His laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, glowing faintly as he got ready for work. I asked him about his schedule, and while he answered, distractedly tying his tie, I memorized the passcode his fingers tapped into the keyboard. 4 numbers. His mother's birthday. Predictable, sentimental, pathetic. After he left, I sat in front of the screen, the house bathed in morning light. For a moment, I hesitated. Even after everything, part of me still believed that invading his privacy was wrong. But betrayal changes the definition of wrong. I took a breath, entered the code, and waited. The desktop came alive. Emails, messages. A separate folder marked Work Travel. I clicked it open, and my heart dropped, not from shock, but from confirmation. Hotel receipts from San Antonio, Austin, Dallas. The same pattern each time. 2 nights, 2 meals, 2 glasses of wine. I scrolled further and found one message pinned at the top. The sender's name made my stomach twist. Clara. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly. It was logistics. A list of dates, a note about a room with the view he likes, a playful comment about making sure the boss behaves. My breath caught, but no sound left me. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the wall until the shapes in the wallpaper blurred. My own daughter-in-law, my son's wife. The betrayal was so obscene, it almost felt theatrical, like something out of a cheap soap opera. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life, collapsing in slow motion while the refrigerator hummed and birds sang outside as if the world had no conscience at all. By late afternoon, I had printed every receipt and email and placed them in a plain brown envelope. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but having the proof felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. It was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was fact, black ink on white paper. That evening, when Richard came home, I greeted him as usual. I cooked dinner. He talked about business, about the new investor he was meeting later in the week. I listened, nodding, asking gentle questions, hiding the envelope inside a cookbook on the shelf behind me. I watched him eat, watched his hands, his mouth, the faint tremor in his jaw when he spoke of travel. Guilt has its own rhythm, it's never still. After dinner, I washed the dishes while he sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone. I could see his reflection in the window, his face lit by the screen, his mouth twitching with the hint of a smile. I wondered what she had texted him. I wondered if he thought of me at all. When he finally went upstairs, I stayed by the sink, letting the warm water run over my hands until it turned cold. The night outside pressed against the glass, heavy and endless. I thought about my son Ethan, about the moment he would find out what his father and wife had done. I imagined his face, the shatter of it, and felt a pang of guilt so deep it almost made me falter. Almost. I dried my hands, turned off the lights, and whispered into the dark. No more pretending. It wasn't a declaration. It was a vow. The next day, I stopped believing in coincidences. They're just truths wearing costumes, waiting for the right light to reveal them. That morning, when Richard left for the office, he hugged me in that quick, practiced way that feels more like a habit than affection. But there it was again, that faint floral scent I'd noticed before. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even from our house. It clung to him like an unspoken confession. After he drove away, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the trail of his car disappear down the street. The sun was bright, but something in the light felt cruel, like it was showing me what I hadn't wanted to see. I turned back to the kitchen and breathed in the familiar smell of coffee and toast, grounding myself in the ordinary. I was about to pour another cup when I noticed his jacket draped over the back of the chair. I don't know why I reached for it. Maybe because I already knew what I'd find, or maybe because part of me still needed proof. I lifted it gently, brought it close, and there it was. The same perfume, sweet but sharp, the kind of scent that announces itself before you even enter a room. I closed my eyes and remembered Clara's hug from the week before, how that same fragrance lingered faintly on her hair. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I had run out of tears years ago, somewhere between the long nights of waiting and the quiet mornings of pretending. I set the jacket back down, folded neatly as if nothing had happened. My hands shook only once when I realized how easily a family could become a lie, how betrayal could hide in something as delicate as perfume. Later that day, I went to the cafe to check inventory. The place was warm, busy, filled with chatter and the smell of cinnamon and espresso. It should have comforted me, but instead, every sound felt distant. I moved through the motions, counting bags of beans, updating invoices, until my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I could almost hear his voice, smooth, steady, rehearsed. Then another message appeared beneath it, one I wasn't supposed to see. It was from Clara. The preview line read, "Can't wait to see you." My heart stopped, then started again with mechanical precision. The universe doesn't send warnings, it sends mirrors. And in that moment, I saw myself clearly, standing in a cafe I had built, surrounded by people who respected me, while my husband and daughter-in-law carved my life apart in secret. That evening, I cooked dinner for one. I set the table, poured wine, and let the clock tick through the silence. When Richard finally came home, he smelled faintly of aftershave and guilt. He kissed my forehead, said he was exhausted, and disappeared upstairs. I followed him with my eyes, not my steps. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I wanted the truth to keep digging its own grave. Before going to bed, I wrote his travel dates on a notepad, cross-referencing them with the receipts I'd already found. Every meeting matched a weekend Clara had been visiting her mother. The pattern was undeniable. Still, I needed more. Something irrefutable, something that would make even him tremble. When I turned off the light, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The air in the room was thick with that same floral trace, the ghost of a woman who didn't belong there. I whispered into the dark. Not a prayer, not a curse, just a promise. I'll make sure you smell it too. By the end of that week, the silence in our house had a pulse. It beat beneath every small conversation, every clinking fork at dinner, every lie that came dressed as routine. Richard moved through the rooms like a man rehearsing innocence, but I could feel the distance growing between us, wide, invisible, dangerous. I decided I needed someone who could see what I couldn't, someone who could turn my suspicions into something concrete. The next morning, I walked into a narrow office downtown with fading gold letters on the glass door. Graham and Associates, Private Investigations. Inside, a small fan stirred the heavy air. The man behind the desk looked like he'd seen too many confessions and believed too few. His name was Arthur Graham, and he greeted me with a politeness that wasn't pity, but understanding. "I need to know the truth," I said simply. "All of it." He studied my face for a long moment before asking the usual questions, dates, names, reasons. I answered quietly, sliding the envelope across the desk. Inside were the printed emails, hotel receipts, and a photo of Clara and Ethan from a family barbecue 2 summers ago. "That's my son," I said softly. "And that's his wife." Arthur's brow furrowed. "You think she's the one?" "I don't think anymore," I replied. "I know." He nodded, no judgment in his eyes, just a calm efficiency that somehow steadied me. "Give me 48 hours, he said. "I'll find what you need." When I stepped back outside, the air smelled like rain. The clouds hung low over Asheville, heavy and gray. I walked without a destination, my feet moving faster than my thoughts. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger, just anticipation, like waiting for a verdict I already knew. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. A message from Arthur. "Meet me at my office. I have what you asked for." When I arrived, he didn't speak at first. He simply handed me a manila folder. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Richard and Clara leaving a restaurant, holding hands. Another one, standing close in a hotel parking lot. And one more that made my breath stop. The two of them on a hotel balcony, his hand on her back, her face tilted toward his in a kiss that looked too practiced to be new. Arthur cleared his throat. There's also a recording. You might not want to hear it. I took the small drive he offered. I want to hear everything, I said. That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop and pressed play. Their voices filled the kitchen. Laughing, teasing, plotting. At first, it was just infidelity. But then Clara said something that froze the blood in my veins. Once the cafe is signed over, we can finally take it public. He won't even see it coming. I pressed pause. The silence afterward was deafening. They weren't just betraying me. They were planning to steal the business I built, the legacy meant for my son. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark window that reflected my face. The woman looking back wasn't broken. She was awake. Betrayal had burned through the last layer of patience I had left, and what remained was something fierce and frighteningly clear. Before going to bed, I called Arthur. My voice was steady. I don't need more proof, I said, but I may need your help again soon. He hesitated. What kind of help? The kind that ends things, I replied. When I hung up, I walked to the mirror and studied my reflection. My hair was graying, my eyes lined with years of trying to be kind. But there was something new there now, something that didn't ask for permission. For the first time in decades, I saw myself and thought, she's not done yet. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, but my thoughts were loud, sharp, organized, methodical. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I used to make grocery lists and plan family dinners. Now it was my war room. In front of me lay the photos, the receipts, the printed emails, and that little flash drive holding voices I would never be able to unhear. When you discover betrayal, it doesn't kill you instantly. It dismantles you piece by piece. You start by doubting them. Then, slowly, you start doubting yourself. I stared at those papers and thought about how many times I'd defended Richard to Ethan. How many times I'd told my son that his father was just overworked, just stressed, just tired. What a fool I had been, raising a family around a man whose loyalty was as thin as printer paper. I replayed the recording one last time, just to be sure. Clara's voice, light and careless, filled the room again. Once the cafe is signed over, we'll change the name. He won't even notice at first. Then Richard's laughter followed, deep, familiar, and foreign all at once. She still thinks we're expanding. By the time she figures it out, we'll already own everything. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Anger is supposed to come like fire, sudden and hot, but mine came like ice, slow, creeping, unstoppable. I realized they hadn't just betrayed a marriage. They had betrayed my work, my motherhood, my years of sacrifice. They had planned to erase me completely. By mid-morning, I had already made up my mind. I took the flash drive, the photos, and the folder of documents, and locked them in the safe behind the pantry wall. I didn't need to look at them again. I didn't need more proof. What I needed was a plan. Later that day, Ethan stopped by the cafe. His smile, tired but kind, softened something in me. He had his father's eyes, but not his lies. "You all right, Mom?" he asked, noticing the faint tremor in my hands as I poured his coffee. "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking about making some changes." He laughed. "You always say that before you renovate a store or start a new menu." I smiled, but my chest ached. If only he knew what kind of renovation I was planning. That evening, when Richard came home, he was distracted, phone in hand, typing quickly. He didn't even notice me watching from across the room. When he finally looked up, he smiled that practiced smile, the one that once melted me and now felt like a mask. "How was your day?" he asked. "Productive," I said. "Yours?" "Busy," he replied. "But I think things are finally coming together." I almost laughed at the irony of it. "I'm glad," I said softly. "I'd hate to see everything fall apart." He didn't notice the edge in my tone. He kissed my cheek, thanked me for dinner, and disappeared into his office upstairs. The sound of his footsteps was steady, confident. He had no idea that every step he took brought him closer to the end. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the moonlight cutting through the blinds in thin, bright stripes. I thought about Clara, about how she had smiled at me during family dinners, how she'd called me Mom, how I had trusted her with my son's heart. I imagined her standing next to Richard, whispering plans in the dark. The image didn't hurt anymore. It fueled me. I understood something crucial then. Betrayal wants you to collapse. It feeds on your silence, your tears, your disbelief. But once you accept it, once you name it, it loses power. It becomes clay, waiting to be reshaped. And I was ready to sculpt something devastatingly precise. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm, almost peaceful on the surface. Richard moved through the house as if nothing had changed, humming softly in the mornings, tapping away on his laptop at night. He was a man rehearsing normalcy, and I played my part in the scene. I smiled when he spoke, cooked his favorite meals, even laughed at his tired jokes. If he noticed the calmness in me, he mistook it for surrender. It wasn't surrender. It was precision. When you decide to end something, you learn the value of silence. You learn that noise draws suspicion, but stillness builds power. I began planning in the quiet moments, between phone calls, while the coffee brewed, while he slept. Every detail mattered. Every habit of his was a potential weapon. I started small, testing boundaries. I asked casual questions about the business, about the expansion plan, pretending to be interested again. He seemed delighted by my curiosity, explaining contracts and projections with renewed enthusiasm. He didn't realize I was mapping his every lie. His eyes lit up when he mentioned Clara's contribution. I nodded politely, though inside I could feel the storm gathering. At the cafe, I began preparing my own groundwork. I spoke to the accountant, requested copies of every document related to ownership, licensing, trademarks. My staff assumed I was planning another renovation. I didn't correct them. Let them think I was building something new. They weren't wrong. I was building an ending. On Wednesday, I went through Richard's desk while he showered. I knew his patterns, his timing. 10 minutes of running water meant 8 minutes of opportunity. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of invoices, I found a folder labeled Expansion, San Antonio. I opened it and smiled. My name wasn't on a single page. He had already drafted the transfer of ownership to a silent partner, Clara Jensen. Her signature line was blank, waiting. I traced it with my fingertip, imagining the moment she'd realize her name on a document could also be her downfall. When Richard came downstairs, I was back at the table, reading the paper. "Big day ahead?" I asked. "Always," he said, kissing my hair. "You spoil me, you know that?" I smiled. "I know." He left without noticing the faint scent of chili oil still lingering on the dish towel by the sink. That afternoon, I drove to the outskirts of Asheville, to a small storage facility near the train tracks. It was Arthur's suggestion. "If you're planning something, keep the pieces separate," he'd told me. Inside the unit, I stored a small box containing duplicates of every document, photo, and recording. I labeled it with a single word: closure. When I locked the door and pocketed the key, I felt lighter. It wasn't revenge that moved me anymore. It was balance, justice, in its purest, simplest form. That evening, Richard was unusually affectionate. He poured me wine, talked about the future, about the trips we'd take once things settled. He painted pictures of a life he had already stolen. I listened, nodding, tracing the rim of my glass with one finger. "Sounds wonderful," I said softly. Inside, I was already writing the final chapter. When the house went quiet that night, I walked into his office. The desk lamp still glowed. I looked at our wedding photo framed on the shelf, the two of us young, laughing, unaware of how much pain the years would hold. I lifted the frame and set it aside, then opened the drawer where the tube had once been hidden. It was still there, untouched, replaced, waiting. I smiled for the first time in days. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was the sound of something ending, and something far stronger beginning. Once you accept that something sacred has died, the only thing left to decide is what you'll build from the ashes. For me, that decision came easily. I wasn't going to scream or beg or throw things. I'd spent too many years trying to be heard. It was time to be understood. I spent the next few days studying Richard's schedule. He was nothing if not predictable. Mondays he met with clients, Tuesdays with his accountant, Thursdays with Clara. They called those evenings strategy sessions, which was almost poetic. Every betrayal deserves its own kind of irony, and his would arrive in a form he'd never forget. Late one night, I sat at the kitchen table sketching out my plan on the back of a grocery list. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. I knew where he kept his keys, when he left his office unlocked, and who had access to the building after hours. I knew the cleaning crew left around 7 and that security cameras looped every 30 minutes. He'd taught me how to be efficient, meticulous, prepared. He just never expected me to use those lessons against him. I started by collecting small supplies, nothing that would draw attention. A pair of gloves, a bottle of cleaner, a roll of tape, and of course, the chili oil. I'd kept it sealed, untouched, waiting like a promise. When I held it in my hand, I didn't feel guilt. I felt purpose. The line between justice and revenge is thin, but that night, I stopped caring about balance. I called Arthur. "I don't need you to follow him anymore," I said. "I need something else." He hesitated. "What kind of something?" "The kind that makes sure people see what they've been pretending not to." He didn't ask for details. Maybe he saw it in my eyes when I dropped off an envelope the next morning. My instructions, my timeline, and a single photograph of Richard's office. "You'll know when to act," I told him. Back home, I prepared the final details. I opened his drawer one last time, unscrewed the cap, and poured the deep red oil with careful precision. Its scent was sharp, almost sweet. The kind of sweetness that warns before it burns. I cleaned the outside, replaced the cap, and set it exactly where I had found it. Then I locked the office door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, breathing steady, heart calm. That night, Richard came home later than usual. His shirt was untucked, his smile wide, his guilt disguised as fatigue. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, and sat across from me at the table. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone light but probing. "I've had a lot on my mind," I answered. He nodded. "Good things, I hope." "Closure," I said. "Mostly closure." He raised an eyebrow, uncertain if it was a threat or a confession. I didn't elaborate. The power of silence is that it makes other people fill in the blanks with their own fears. Before going to bed, I packed a small overnight bag. A few clothes, my keys, the storage unit pass. In the mirror, I studied my reflection. My hair was neatly pinned, my expression calm. There was no fury left, no panic, no sadness, only focus. The next morning, I told him I'd be spending the weekend at the mountain property near Boone to rethink the business. He didn't question it. He kissed me goodbye and left with his usual careless charm. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I whispered to the empty house, "Enjoy your weekend, Richard." Because somewhere between Friday and Monday, his world would catch fire, and I would finally breathe. I left early Saturday morning, before the sun rose. The house still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent I'd used the night before, a scent I'd chosen on purpose. Calm, domestic, unthreatening. I wanted everything to feel ordinary. Richard was still asleep when I stood by the doorway, looking at him one last time. He looked peaceful, unaware that the life he'd built on deceit was about to cave in on itself. I placed a note on the kitchen counter. Heading to Boone for the weekend. Need time to plan the new menu. I signed it with a heart, the same way I always did, though this time it felt more like punctuation than affection. The drive through the mountains was quiet. The trees were beginning to turn, their edges tipped in gold and red, as if the landscape itself understood what I was about to do. I didn't go to Boone. I went to the small apartment of my friend and neighbor, Caroline, who had agreed to let me stay there for a few days. From her balcony, I had a clear view of downtown, of Richard's office tower gleaming in the distance like a polished lie. Caroline didn't ask many questions. She had lived through her own kind of betrayal years ago, and women like us didn't need explanations. "Do what you have to," she said quietly, as she handed me the spare key. "And when it's done, don't look back." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. That evening, we sat together on her porch, sipping tea. I told her small, harmless pieces of the truth, that I'd discovered Richard was cheating, that I needed to clear my head before making decisions. I didn't tell her the rest. The fewer people who knew, the safer my peace would be when the smoke settled. Sunday afternoon, I called Arthur. "It's time," I said. My voice was steady. He didn't ask what came next. "You're sure?" "Completely." He promised to keep his distance, but be ready if I needed him. "You don't sound angry," he said before hanging up. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm precise." That night, I stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker against the dark sky. Somewhere in one of those glowing squares, Richard was getting ready for his next performance. Maybe Clara was there with him. Maybe they were laughing, pouring wine, whispering the same lines they'd rehearsed 100 times before. I pictured them moving toward the desk, reaching for that tube, and a chill ran through me. Not from guilt, but from inevitability. In the quiet of that small apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel everything I had buried for years. Disappointment, exhaustion, the ache of loving a man who never saw me as real. Then, beneath all that, something lighter, freedom. I took a deep breath and whispered to the city below, "Let them show the world who they are." When the clock struck midnight, I turned off the lights and sat in darkness. I thought of my mother's voice saying that love should never make a woman small. I thought of my son, and how one day he would understand that silence can be louder than any scream. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was peaceful, the kind of peace that only follows decision. By the time morning light spilled through the curtains, the trap had already been set. All that was left was to wait for the sound of consequence echoing through glass and steel. And when it came, I would be ready to listen. Monday evening arrived with the kind of calm that always precedes disaster. From Caroline's balcony, I watched the city lights blink awake one by one, each window telling a story of people who believed their secrets were safe. Somewhere among them, Richard and Clara were preparing to meet, unaware that the air around them was already heavy with inevitability. By 7, I knew he would be there. He always stayed late on Mondays, claiming the quiet helped him focus. I imagined Clara arriving after hours, parking in the back lot to avoid attention. She would enter through the employee door, her perfume filling the hallway like an announcement. The thought didn't hurt anymore. It simply felt like watching a movie I'd already seen too many times. I called Arthur. "They're in," he said. "The guard confirmed she used his pass. He's shutting off the cameras like you asked." "Good," I said quietly. "Make sure someone's nearby when it happens. I don't want them alone too long." He hesitated. "You're not going to the building, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Of course not. I'm already where I need to be." When I hung up, I set my coffee cup down and leaned against the balcony railing. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the hum of traffic and the faint whistle of a passing train. Somewhere downtown in that glass tower, the scene was unfolding exactly as I'd designed it. Inside the office, I imagined the soft click of the door closing behind them, the murmur of low laughter, the sound of a zipper, the lies taking physical shape. And then, inevitably, the burn. Arthur called again a few minutes later. I didn't even say hello. His voice came fast, controlled, but edged with disbelief. "It's happening. Someone heard shouting. Security's on their way up." "Keep the line open," I said. Through the faint noise on the other end, I heard the chaos breaking loose. Muffled cries, a door slamming, a woman's voice shrieking. Then the wail of the building alarm. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't race. I felt only stillness, an eerie calm that comes when justice finally catches up. Arthur's voice came back, lower now. "Fire alarms are triggered, sprinklers too. The whole floor's flooding. Fire department's been called." "Good," I said. "Let them put it out." When the call ended, I stepped inside, closing the balcony door behind me. From the window, I could see the faint reflection of blue and red lights flickering in the distance. It was strange how quiet it all looked from here, how small disasters appear when you're finally above them. Caroline came into the room, her expression pale but steady. "Is it done?" "Yes," I said softly. "It's done." She studied me for a moment. "Do you feel better?" "Not better," I replied. "Just finished." Down below, sirens blended with the noise of evening traffic. Somewhere in that chaos, my husband and my daughter-in-law were learning what consequence felt like. I imagined the confusion on their faces, the fear, the humiliation. I didn't rejoice in it. I simply allowed it to exist, like gravity, necessary and impartial. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same red we used to share on anniversaries, and lifted it slightly toward the skyline. "To truth," I whispered. Caroline turned off the news before it could reach us. "You don't need to watch," she said. "I already did," I answered. "For 40 years. Outside, the sirens grew louder, then faded, replaced by the ordinary sounds of a city returning to routine. But in one corner of Asheville, inside a flooded office filled with smoke and shame, 2 people were learning that some secrets don't stay buried. They come back screaming. When the fire alarm went off, the entire building erupted in confusion. Workers on the lower floors rushed into the hallways, clutching phones and jackets, looking upward toward the source of the chaos. Someone shouted that smoke was coming from the 12th floor, Richard's floor. The sprinklers had triggered, soaking everything in sight. From Caroline's balcony, I could already see the flashing of emergency lights reflected against the glass tower downtown. Arthur called again, his voice crackling through the line. "It's bad," he said. "Real bad. Paramedics are on their way, and everyone's talking." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The image was already forming clearly in my mind. Richard doubled over in agony, Clara screaming beside him, the smell of chili oil burning through the air as humiliation replaced intimacy. There was a bitter satisfaction in knowing that the fire inside that office wasn't just chemical. It was karmic. Within minutes, the street outside the building was crowded with onlookers. Phones recorded from every angle, their faces lit by red and blue lights. The firefighters rushed inside with urgency, the metallic clang of their boots echoing through the night. One of those firefighters was Ethan, my son. He had been on shift that night, stationed only a few blocks away. I didn't know until Caroline, standing beside me, gasped softly at the news report flashing across her television. "Isn't that—" she began, but I already knew. I recognized his stride, his posture, even from the grainy footage. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The irony cut so deep it almost felt poetic. Fate wasn't satisfied with private justice. It demanded audience participation. My son was walking straight into the wreckage of 2 betrayals, his father's and his wife's. "Turn it off," I said quietly. Caroline hesitated but obeyed. I stood in silence, staring at my own reflection in the darkened window. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the glass of wine I hadn't finished. I took a slow sip, tasting not victory, but finality. Arthur texted again. "They're taking them out now. It's a mess. People are filming everything." The words blurred for a second, and I had to blink to steady them. The plan had worked too well, so well it had turned the truth into spectacle. I thought of Ethan's face when he realized what he was seeing. Would he look at me the same way once he connected the pieces? Or would he only see the ruins of a family he'd believed was whole? The sound of sirens faded gradually, replaced by the low murmur of a city gossiping in real time. Twitter, news feeds, group chats. It wouldn't take long before everyone in Asheville knew the story. Scandal travels faster than light. Caroline touched my arm gently. "You did what you had to do," she said. "I know," I whispered, "but even justice leaves a scar." I walked back to the balcony and watched the reflection of the flashing lights fade against the skyline. The night air was cool, but my skin felt feverish, like my body couldn't decide if it wanted to shiver or breathe. Somewhere below, my son was helping to carry his father and his wife out of that building. Somewhere in the noise, the lies had finally stopped echoing. I closed my eyes and imagined the sound of water pouring from the sprinklers, washing away the evidence of years of deceit. It was almost cleansing, almost holy. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, detached. "Let them be saved," I said softly, "just enough to face what they've done." And with that, I set down my glass, turned off the lights, and walked away from the window. The storm had broken, and all that was left now was the silence that follows when truth has done its work. By morning, the footage was everywhere. A dozen videos from different phones captured flashing lights, soaked carpets, and chaos spilling out of the 12th floor. The news called it a chemical incident. The word made me laugh under my breath. That's what they called betrayal too, an internal reaction that burns on contact. Carolyn's living room glowed with early sunlight. She'd brewed coffee, trying to make the morning normal. I sat on the couch, watching the muted news, reading the captions instead of listening. 2 hospitalized after exposure in office mishap. No names yet, just blurred faces on stretchers. But I recognized the watch on Richard's wrist. Ethan's fire crew appeared next. He was the only one without a mask, his expression blank, professional, focused on the task. I could tell by the set of his shoulders that he already knew who he was rescuing. A mother knows the way her child carries pain. When the segment ended, Caroline turned off the TV. "It's done," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, not yet." I opened my phone. Notifications lit up the screen. Friends, employees, even suppliers from the cafe. Everyone was talking. The rumors came fast. The Hill building, Richard Hill involved. Something about a woman. I scrolled through the flood of speculation until I saw a single text from Ethan. "Mom, we need to talk." I typed back, "I know, sweetheart. I'll come soon." He didn't respond. The rest of the day moved in fragments. The city buzzed with gossip while I moved through the apartment like a ghost, folding the same towel twice, setting my mug down and forgetting where I'd put it. The calm that had carried me through the plan began to crack around the edges, not from regret, but from the sudden emptiness that comes when your purpose is complete. By evening, Arthur called. "They're both stable," he said. "Second-degree burns, minor inhalation injuries. But the scandal? It's everywhere. The board suspended Richard from operations this morning." "Good," I said quietly. "Let them heal. I want them alive to watch it all fall apart." Arthur was silent for a moment. "Your son? I'll speak to him tomorrow." After we hung up, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sunset staining the mountains in deep red and violet. From this distance, Asheville looked peaceful, untouched by the storm. But peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the acknowledgement of it. That night, I packed my things from Caroline's apartment. She watched me, arms crossed, her eyes soft but searching. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go home," I said. "Face what's left." The drive back was long and quiet. The roads wound through the mountains, and the sky was a deep indigo ribbon above the trees. Every mile felt like a confession. I thought about Ethan, about the look on his face when he would finally hear everything. I thought about Richard and Clara, lying in hospital beds side by side, stripped of their secrecy. When I reached the city limits, I passed the building. The windows on the 12th floor were dark, taped over with plastic. The damage was visible even from the street, smoke stains against the pale stone. I parked for a moment and watched the empty entrance. Somewhere behind those doors, the ghosts of my marriage still lingered, whispering in the smell of burned paper and cheap perfume. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. That building had already told my story to the world. I rolled down the window, let the cool night air fill the car, and whispered a single word into the quiet. Enough. Then I started the engine, turned away from the wreckage and drove home, ready to meet my son, ready to face the ashes I had made. Ethan was already at the house when I pulled into the driveway. His truck sat crookedly near the curb, lights still on, the driver's door half open as if he had leapt out before the engine stopped. I could see him through the front window, standing in the living room, motionless, staring at the family photos on the wall. For a moment, I stayed in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, unsure which version of myself he would see first, the mother who raised him or the woman who destroyed what his father pretended to be. When I opened the door, he turned sharply. His uniform was still damp from the night before, dark stains trailing up his sleeves. The smell of smoke clung to him. His eyes, usually gentle, carried a weight I had never seen before. "Mom," he said quietly, not accusation yet, but confusion. "You knew." I didn't answer right away. I took off my coat, hung it neatly on the rack, and met his gaze. "Yes," I said finally. "I knew." He took a step closer, his voice cracking. "How long?" Long enough to understand that forgiveness wasn't an option anymore. He exhaled sharply and rubbed the back of his neck, pacing once across the room. "Do you know what it was like walking in there?" he asked. "Hearing the alarms, the screaming, not knowing until I saw them?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "I never wanted you to see that, Ethan." "But you made sure someone would," he said, his tone trembling between rage and disbelief. The word struck me harder than I expected. I looked down at my hands, still steady, still composed. "They needed to be seen for who they were," I said softly. "Sometimes the truth refuses to whisper." He stared at me for a long time, searching for something, remorse maybe, or shame. Finding neither, he sank onto the couch. "You could have told me," he said. I sat across from him, leaving a careful distance. "Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to comfort after nightmares. Now I was the one who had written the nightmare. Finally, he asked, "Why her? Clara of all people?" I shook my head slowly. "Because cruelty doesn't need logic. It only needs opportunity." His eyes glistened, and he wiped his face quickly, angry at his own tears. "She's gone, Mom. She's not coming back. The hospital discharged her to her parents' place in Raleigh. Dad's still there, and I don't even know if he'll face charges." "He'll face something," I said quietly, "even if it's himself." He studied me again, softer this time. "And you? What do you face now?" I looked around the room, our family photos, the books, the lingering scent of smoke that had followed him inside. "Peace," I said finally. "It doesn't come easy, but it comes honest." He nodded slowly, his shoulders sinking as if the fight had gone out of him. "You know, part of me wants to be angry," he said. "But another part—" He looked away, then back at me. "Another part understands. You did what no one else ever could. You stopped pretending." I smiled faintly, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. That's all I ever wanted. We sat there in silence, two survivors in the wreckage of the same house, the same bloodline, breathing the same heavy air. Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing, the one Richard used to fix every summer. I wondered if Ethan would ever sit there again, or if some places become too haunted to hold peace. He stood, finally, and said, "I'll help you rebuild, Mom, whatever that means." As he walked toward the door, I called after him softly. "Ethan?" He turned. "Thank you for coming home," I said. He nodded once, his face caught between love and ache. "You already did," he said. Then he left, leaving the door open just long enough for the morning light to spill inside. By Tuesday, the story had outgrown the city. Local headlines turned into regional news, and by afternoon, national outlets had picked it up. They called it the Asheville office scandal. Two lovers trapped in an office accident, one of them a married executive, the other his daughter-in-law. Every anchor spoke in the same hushed tone, as if narrating a tragedy they secretly enjoyed. I watched it unfold from the corner of my cafe, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in front of me. Customers whispered in low voices, their curiosity sharper than judgment. A few tried to act normal, ordering pastries, complimenting the decor, but their eyes kept flicking toward me. I didn't blame them. I had become the story behind the story, the wife who never said a word. When the first reporter showed up, I didn't flinch. A young woman with too much makeup and not enough empathy stood by the counter, notebook ready. "Mrs. Hill," she began carefully, "do you have any comment about what happened at the Hill building?" I wiped the counter, took my time, and said, "We serve breakfast until 11. Then I smiled, not warmly but firmly, and turned away. The cafe filled with nervous laughter. It wasn't the sound of mockery, it was relief. My employees, who had been watching in quiet loyalty all morning, smiled too. That moment, small and fleeting, was mine. By noon, more cameras gathered outside. Arthur came by and stood guard near the door, pretending to browse the pastry case. "They're going to camp here for a while," he murmured. "I know," I said. "Let them." He glanced at me, a faint trace of admiration in his eyes. "You're handling this better than most." "I had 40 years of rehearsal," I replied. When the evening broadcast aired, they replayed the footage again. The flashing lights, the soaked hallway, the stretchers. This time, they said their names out loud. Richard Hill, prominent local businessman, and Clara Jensen Hill, his daughter-in-law. The room went silent. Ethan came in just as the report ended. He wore plain clothes now, but exhaustion clung to him like another uniform. He poured himself coffee and stood beside me behind the counter. "They'll forget soon," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "They'll move on. That's different." He nodded, staring into his cup. "Dad's still in the hospital. I don't know if he'll ever go back to work. Clara's staying with her parents." "I expected as much," I said. He hesitated, then added, "You know, some people are saying what you did was cruel." I turned to him, my voice steady. "And what would they call what they did?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. When the cafe closed, I locked the door and stood for a moment under the dim light of the sign outside. The word Hills glowed softly, the same name that had once meant family, now only survival. For the first time, I considered changing it. Maybe soon. I walked home through quiet streets, the air damp with the promise of rain. Passing neighbors offered cautious smiles. A few whispered good evenings that carried sympathy beneath their politeness. It struck me how quickly people choose sides when they're given a story to believe. At home, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered through the drizzle, blurred like watercolor. On the television across the street, I could see my own face, a still image from years ago, a charity dinner, a smile that looked naive now. The reporter's voice carried faintly through the open window. When reached for comment, Margaret Hill declined to speak. Good, I thought. Let the silence speak for itself. The storm outside grew stronger, rain tapping against the glass in soft, steady rhythm. Somewhere in that rhythm, I heard something new. Not chaos this time, but calm. The kind that comes after fire, when the smoke clears and you finally see what's left standing. 2 days later, I stood in the sterile hallway of St. Joseph Medical Center. The air smelled like antiseptic and tired hope. Nurses moved quietly, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. I carried a thin envelope under my arm, its weight small but final. Inside were divorce papers and legal transfers, everything that would end what remained of my marriage, both personally and professionally. The nurse at the desk looked up as I approached. "Mrs. Hill?" she asked softly. "He's awake. Room 214. I thanked her and walked down the corridor, my heels clicking softly, echoing against the walls. Every step sounded too loud, as if the hospital itself wanted to remind me of where I was headed. When I opened the door, Richard turned his head. He looked smaller somehow, deflated, his skin pale against the white sheets. Bandages covered his arms. His eyes widened when he saw me, not with affection, but with recognition of consequence. "Margaret," he rasped, his voice rough, "you came." "Yes," I said, placing the envelope on the small table beside his bed. "To return what's yours." He looked at it, then at me, confusion flickering briefly. "What's this?" "Closure," I said simply. He reached out, wincing, and brushed his fingers across the papers. "You think this fixes anything?" I met his gaze. "Nothing fixes what you broke, but this stops it from spreading." For a moment, silence filled the room. The steady beeping of the monitor sounded like a metronome marking the end of a song. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said quietly. You never do, I replied. You just let it go as far as it can until someone else has to clean it up. He looked away, his eyes glistening. It was just supposed to be between us, he muttered. I stepped closer. That's the problem, Richard. You thought betrayal could stay private. He flinched, his hand tightening around the edge of the blanket. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself, I said. My voice wasn't sharp, it was calm, measured, the tone of a verdict long overdue. He stared at me, his lips trembling. Ethan knows. Yes, I said softly, and he still came to help you. You should thank him for that. Richard's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. I loved you once, he said. I nodded. I believe you did. But love that doesn't respect becomes something else. And I won't live inside that anymore. I picked up the pen from the bedside table and set it beside the papers. Sign them, I said. And when you do, you'll never hear from me again. He stared at the pen for a long moment. You're really walking away, he whispered. I already did, I said. As I turned to leave, his voice broke behind me. Margaret. I paused at the doorway. Yes? Was it worth it? I looked back at him, taking in the tubes, the bandages, the sterile white light. No, I said softly. But it was necessary. Outside the room, the nurse gave me a sympathetic smile. I nodded faintly and walked down the hall toward the exit. The automatic doors opened with a gentle hiss, and the late afternoon sun spilled across the floor. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply. The air smelled clean, not of antiseptic or guilt, but of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The days that followed felt quieter than I expected. No reporters, no calls, just the slow rhythm of a house that was finally mine again. For years, this place had echoed with Richard's voice, his demands, his absences disguised as responsibility. Now, the silence he'd once forced on me belonged to me entirely, and it was peaceful. Ethan visited every evening. He brought groceries, sometimes dinner, always carrying a weariness that didn't belong to someone his age. One night, he arrived with a small stack of mail and said, People keep sending you letters. Some call you brave, some call you cruel. I smiled. They both mean I did something they'd never have the courage to do. He chuckled softly, though there was sadness behind it. Dad signed everything, he said after a pause. The lawyer sent confirmation. You're free. Free. The word felt fragile, almost dangerous. Freedom after 4 decades of endurance isn't soft. It's disorienting. It doesn't taste like victory. It tastes like quiet, and quiet takes getting used to. After he left that night, I poured a glass of water and walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the small reminders of a life that no longer fit. On Richard's desk, I found an old ledger from the early days of our business, handwritten notes, prices, supply lists, my name scribbled beside his. Seeing it didn't hurt. It felt like archaeology, like uncovering the ruins of something that once thrived but was never meant to last forever. The next morning, I went to the cafe. The staff froze for a moment when I walked in, unsure how to greet me. Then one of them, a young barista named Hannah, whispered, "It's good to have you back." That simple sentence almost made me cry. I gathered everyone for a brief meeting. "You might hear people talk," I said. "Let them. Just remember, this place stands because of hard work, not gossip. We built this with dignity, and that's how we'll keep it." They nodded, relieved. When I returned to my office, the sunlight was streaming through the window. Dust particles danced in the air, and for the first time, I didn't see them as a sign of neglect, but of life. I opened the ledger again, crossed out Hill's Coffee at the top, and wrote a single word underneath: renewal. By afternoon, customers began trickling in, some hesitant, some openly curious. A woman approached the counter and said quietly, "What they did to you was awful, but the way you handled it." She paused, shaking her head in awe. It gave a lot of us hope. Hope, another fragile word. But I took it, smiled, and said, "Then maybe it was all worth it." Later that night, I sat on the porch with Ethan. The air was cool and the stars looked close enough to touch. "You know," he said softly, "Dad asked about you today. He wanted to know if you'd come see him again." I looked out at the dark line of the mountains. "No," I said. "Some things are meant to stay finished." He nodded, silent for a while. Then, with a small smile, he said, "You seem lighter, Mom." "I am," I admitted, "because for the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone my quiet." We sat there until the air grew cold, watching the last porch light flicker in the distance. I thought about how endings rarely come with explosions. They arrive like dusk, slow and steady, until you look around and realize it's night. But night isn't always bad. It's where rest lives. And rest, I decided, is its own kind of justice. A month passed before the city stopped whispering my name. The cafe was steady again, the customers loyal, the gossip fading into other people's stories. Life, as it always does, found a rhythm. But mine was different now, slower, deliberate, free of the constant ache that used to follow me through every room. I started waking early again, before the first hint of sunrise. The kitchen filled with the smell of coffee, the sound of the radio playing softly in the background. For years, that silence had been oppressive. Now it was comforting, an empty page waiting to be written on. Ethan began spending more time with me at the cafe. We worked side by side like we used to when he was a teenager, before adulthood pulled him into its noise. He handled deliveries. I managed the books. Sometimes he'd look up from the counter, catch me smiling for no reason, and shake his head. "You're dangerous when you're peaceful," he'd say, half joking, half proud. The new sign above the door read, "Renewal Cafe." It wasn't flashy, just honest. People asked if I'd kept the old recipes, and I told them yes, because even when life changes, some flavors deserve to stay. One afternoon, I found an envelope slipped under the door. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's, neat, slanted, always deliberate. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. But curiosity, that old enemy, whispered otherwise. Inside was a single letter. "Margaret, I won't ask for forgiveness. I know it isn't mine to have. But I want you to know that I see it now. All of it. The years I took, the love I squandered, the woman I forgot to respect. You were always the stronger one. Maybe that's why I tried so hard to make you small. Take care of our son, and take care of yourself. You were always better at both than I ever was. Richard." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the back of the ledger. It wasn't redemption, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's all that's left to give. That evening, I told Ethan about the letter. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening just once before relaxing. "You're not going to respond, are you?" "No," I said. "Some words are meant to end a story, not continue it." We closed up together, turning off the lights one by one. Outside, the sky was bruised purple and gold, the kind of sunset that feels like forgiveness without the burden of forgetting. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked as we walked to our cars. I thought for a moment. "I regret believing I needed permission to protect myself," I said. "But not what came after." He smiled faintly. "You really did start over, didn't you?" "I had to," I replied. "If I didn't, I'd still be living in his story instead of mine." When he drove away, I stood for a moment under the cafe sign. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain. A small group of college students passed by, laughing, one of them stopping to take a picture of the new storefront. I heard her say, "I love that name." So did I. I locked the door, slipped the keys into my pocket, and walked home through the quiet streets. The world no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a beginning. Spring arrived early that year. The mountains around Asheville glowed in shades of green so vivid they looked newly invented. From the porch of my home, I could see the dogwoods blooming, their petals soft against the morning sky. For the first time in a long while, I felt the season change, not just outside, but inside me. The cafe was thriving. Renewal had become a small landmark, a place people visited not just for coffee, but for quiet. There was something about the space, about its calmness, its scent of cinnamon and wood, that made strangers linger longer than they planned. Some mornings, customers would ask if I was that Margaret Hill, and I'd smile politely and say, "Once upon a time." Then I'd hand them their drink and move on. Ethan managed most of the business now. He'd grown into a man who understood both kindness and boundaries, a rare mix I had learned the hard way. Watching him greet customers, confident and steady, felt like watching a second chance unfold, not just for him, but for me too. Richard had moved away quietly. His lawyer sent word that he'd signed over the last remaining shares of the company. No more negotiations, no lingering debts, just silence. I heard he was living somewhere near the coast, alone. I didn't wish him harm, but I didn't wish him comfort either. Some lessons are meant to echo. On a warm Sunday afternoon, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since the storm had ended. The cemetery overlooked the river, the air sweet with honeysuckle. I knelt, brushing the dust from her name. "I kept your advice," I whispered. I loved him, but I didn't forget myself this time. The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of earth and flowers, and for a moment, it felt like an answer. That evening, I returned home and opened all the windows. The curtains swayed gently in the soft air. The house, once heavy with secrets, now felt light. Every creak, every shadow belonged to me again. I poured a small cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the light fade. When the first stars appeared, I thought about everything that had happened. The discovery, the betrayal, the fire, the aftermath. People might have called it revenge, but it never felt like that to me. Revenge ends something. What I wanted was to reclaim something. My dignity, my voice, my peace. I thought of all the women who'd written letters, who'd stopped me at the cafe to whisper their own stories of being silenced, used, or forgotten. They didn't want revenge either. They wanted what I had finally learned to give myself, permission to stop apologizing for survival. The clock ticked softly on the wall, the same one my mother had given us as a wedding gift. Its rhythm no longer accused. It kept time for a new life. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of spring drifted in through the open window. Somewhere, far off, thunder rumbled, a storm passing, not coming. I smiled, set down my cup, and whispered into the night, "Let it be over." And for once, it truly was. I never imagined that justice could feel quiet. I used to think it arrived like thunder, loud and absolute, shaking the walls of what once held you captive. But when freedom finally came, it was soft, like the sound of morning rain against an open window. The truth is, my story was never about destroying Richard or even exposing Clara. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had handed away piece by piece over 4 decades. The parts that cooked his meals, balanced his books, smiled through his lies, and believed silence was the same as peace. It took betrayal to teach me the difference. People still ask if I regret it, if I wish I had handled things with more grace. I tell them grace is what comes after survival, not before it. Grace is finding calm after chaos, forgiveness after fire. And I have found it, not in forgetting, but in remembering without pain. Ethan and I still run the cafe together. He brings in new ideas, and I let him take the lead more often now. Watching him grow into his strength reminds me that pain doesn't always pass. It transforms. It becomes wisdom you can hand down, quietly, without bitterness. Sometimes I see women sitting alone by the window, stirring their coffee slowly, lost in thoughts I recognize. I smile at them and say, "You're stronger than you think." Some smile back, some don't, but I know they hear me. They always do. At home, I keep the old ledger on my desk. Inside it, between the pages of numbers and plans, rests Richard's final letter. I never read it again, but I never threw it away either. It reminds me that endings don't always need erasure. Some deserve remembrance. I still wear my wedding ring, not as a symbol of love, but of endurance. It doesn't bind me anymore. It reminds me of how far I've walked. So, if you've listened to my story and felt even a flicker of recognition, I hope you understand this. Justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and walks out the door with her head held high. Because dignity, once reclaimed, never leaves you again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story with love and respect.